admire different like textures of clothes behind you. I just feel like I just want to run my hands like through all those clothes and just be like a heavenly experience.
Yeah, it's funnily enough, my naked torso is behind it, so
Makes sense. The clothes to covering your naked torso.
it's the entrance to Narnia.
Yeah.
I thought we would dive in and begin just by introducing ourselves by means of our relationship to movement. So say whatever feels appropriate, say what feels relevant and right to you, like in this moment in time.
Okay. So my relationship with movement. Okay, so I am like you in that I teach yoga and we have been on our yoga journey together. And my relationship to movement is kind of like it's often the thing that like changes me from like a depressed, tired person in the morning to like a semi-functional human being, sometimes fully functional too. And yeah, it's like a big release for me. It's like like my movement practice is where I can kind of transform the negative things going on in my life into something useful, into something enjoyable, and just kind of put that energy, like take it out of the story that's in my head and put it into an embodied something, whether it's a dance, whether it's just like some like very high powered like running, leaping around, jumping, dancing, screaming, whatever it is, right? It's a way for me to channel that energy through my body and release it in such a way that I'm not carrying the things that are weighing me down, and I can kind of, move away from that. So yeah, my movement practice these days kind of consists of yoga, but also like variations on yoga that's more just like a free flow movement practice consisting of like elements of like things that I've learned through dance or through just, some gymnastics type stuff from pole conditioning. But yoga is sort of the central aspect of what I do because of the connection with the breath and the connection with the thoughts and like how thoughts are coming up and how to move those thoughts and feelings through the body. I also do a lot of flow art stuff, mainly with the hoop, but also dragon staff, which is really kind of the yin to my yang practice of yoga, which is much more discipline focused. So I try and have like an aspect of my movement practice that's focused on discipline and one that's, more fluid and just like almost kind of unconscious or semi-conscious, subconscious. I don't know, like the things that I'm not really thinking about, but I'm just allowing my body to do what feels natural. Yeah, so that's kind of my relationship to movement these days, I suppose. How about you?
That was really beautiful. Thank you. There were a couple of words that you used there that I thought was so that resonated with me. I think the two were transformation, like transforming, and channeling. And the reason I specifically like wanted to talk to you about this is because because of our like history of our journey through movement together, mainly through yoga, but also like through we went running together a few times. I think we used to run together um when we were studying, but also just through dance as well, like going out um and dancing at different events, at a sight trance festival, lots of movement to be had there, a lot of fun. But yeah, I feel like you, aside from our history, you also just you you get it, the whole thing. You get it. Yeah, the whole thing about movement that I'm obsessed with and the reason that I like am devoting my life to different movement practices is because of this aspect of transformation and this aspect of channeling that like kind of has nothing to do really with what I look like. The how your body may change or develop or alter itself due to the movement practices you're doing is kind of, for me, a byproduct of the feeling practice and the sensation practice. So yeah, to kind of bring it to like my relationship with movement, it hasn't always been a very like positive or nourishing uh, part of my life. There have been times where movement has felt like a punishment for one reason or another. Or maybe it was just the certain environments or disciplines I was practicing movement within were the punishing aspect of it, not like the movement itself. So I've had a challenging time with moving my body, but I'm now in this space of like devoting of my life to it. It brings me joy. As you say, like it can really make you feel like go from this is a terrible, terrible day to, oh no, I feel here and I feel good and I feel alive. And I think that's the whole reason I do what I do, and it's the reason I wanted to have this chat. And yeah, I think to like unpack some of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately, I wanted to talk about specifically how we can use movement and movement practices in a radical way to dismantle, for want of a better term, essentially the male gaze. Um, and I just thought I'd bring a definition of the male gaze so we like know where we're at with it, and then we can kind of explore that and talk a bit, unpack that a little bit, because sometimes using these terms that have been like recycled again and again in like social theory, they kind of become a bit redundant. So I was looking at the definition of the male gaze, and I didn't realize that it actually originally came from film theory, and it was very specifically related to how femmes, female presenting beings, are presented in film media. And for me, I think maybe the male gaze is also the patriarchal gaze, basically. So how we present and move and hold ourselves according to patriarchal structures that I believe are ultimately harmful to the body, not just the female body, not just to the femme body, but to the masculine body as well. And I thought it'd be really interesting in a bit to talk about how the male gaze or the patriarchal gaze can also be really harmful to a masculine movement practice, and how it limits the way masculine beings present and move themselves as well. So yeah, that was a bit of a whole lot to wrap our heads around, but I was wondering if you had any immediate thoughts about like movement and the male gaze, and how the patriarchy and these like limiting structures have affected your movement practice, or maybe affect your movement practice to this day.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Let me try and make it like linear and yeah, easy to follow. But I think that the male gaze has definitely impacted not just my movement practice, but my whole like self-image growing up. And thankfully, I feel very grateful now that I have like the understanding of these things and how they operate and the kind of vocabulary to talk about them, because otherwise so much of it just happens without us being conscious of it at all. Because of just, you know, when you see an image or a certain, you know, pattern repeated on, especially like you said, like the term comes from, you know, film specifically, this seeing the image in front of you constantly, of like, this is what you are as a woman or as a person with a female body, this is what you are and these are the limits of what you are. And the kind of suggestion that comes with that, that like outside of that is something abnormal. Sometimes it's not a suggestion, sometimes it's made very overtly, like it's emphasized, like these kind of bodies are not acceptable, we don't like these kind of bodies on screen. In fact, when they come on screen, we'll mostly ridicule them, you know. So like you see just like bad taste jokes about like fat people, or about I don't know if it's politically correct to say fat people, but like, you know, larger bodied people being the butt of jokes just for no other reason except for they have a larger body, which seems like a really not a very funny joke to me. But like there are a lot of these kind of pandering to this low level humor of just like, that's ugly, ha ha ha. And this kind of like constant reinforcement that certain kinds of bodies are beautiful, and you know, even within that, like the power of the people who have those bodies is very limited because they're only allowed to be represented by their bodies and how appealing their bodies are. So just overall, it's just a very dehumanizing experience to see women represented in such a limited way on the screen, and then also to have the people around them, whether it's the people watching the movie or television show or seeing things on their phone or whatever, making comments, or within the context of whatever you're watching, like in the film, people making comments and speaking about certain characters in a very specific way. So yeah, like just the stereotypes that women get pushed into in a lot of cinema. It's, you know, even though like some moves recently have been made towards more progressive representation of women, and now there are maybe slightly more female writers writing female characters, but even still, it's just like so frustratingly reductive. Sometimes you just like the limited kinds of people that are on screen and the limited kinds of roles that they can play, it can just get very, I mean, I personally just don't want to watch most mainstream movies right now because it's just like you just see so many boring stereotypes recycled and recycled, and so much boring male writing about female characters that like I think a lot of women are just like, I don't want to see this, like this is nonsense, this has nothing to do, like even things that I enjoy, like I don't know if you watch The Queen's Gambit, I watch that because I like seeing the chess stuff and whatever, but you know, like every time she's going through like a difficult situation in that show, it's always like she's just, you know, I don't know, it's just this weird thing where there's no emotional depth to exploring what she's going through, but it's all very external, just like shots of her, you know, in short shorts in her house, smoking cigarettes and looking like a femme fatale, sexy, whatever. And it's like, you know, there's like zero emotional depth to this story that should have a lot of emotional depth, because she like grows up in an orphanage and she's like on drugs and she's a kid because they like medicate all the kids in the orphanage, and there's a lot to get into emotionally and psychologically, but the show never goes there, and it rather like spends all this time just like basically showing the viewer how desirable this woman is. And it's just like, okay, it's nice that they showed a woman in chess, but like, did they have to show her in this way? Did they have to make her so sexual? Like, the whole thing is that, you know, women have brains and are not just defined by their sexuality, but they had to make her super sexy, and she had to be influenced by drugs all the time when she was doing her chess games, which kind of like undermines the validity of like what she's doing. These kind of like narrow realms in which women are allowed to succeed or allowed to be like interesting characters. It's just annoying to watch as a woman, where you're just like, wow, like why did they spend so many scenes with her just like looking beautiful and all these men fawning over her, and like no scenes about like how she actually is dealing with the situation and how she feels and what's going on underneath the surface and what's her inner world like. That lack of exploration of the inner world is just really common in media and movies. And so yeah, I think like I'm not alone in saying that that's massively impacted me. And I'm lucky in the sense that because I started doing movement practices very young, and because I had an eating disorder, and I went into treatment for my eating disorder, and I had to do a lot of mental work about like how I perceive my body, and what my relationship with my body could be, instead of being this really self-destructive relationship. So I'm really lucky in that sense, because I got to consciously start confronting these issues very young. But I've seen so many women around me never really deal with these issues, because maybe they didn't have like a full-blown eating disorder or something that was like considered that urgent that they go and like start really doing very deep work. For me, I had to really start doing very deep work, because my health was very much suffering, and all the people around me were like, what are you doing? Like it was really making my whole life fall apart. So it kind of caused a crisis of I have to deal with this. But so many women go through their whole life just never always feeling inferior because of the imagery that is put around them. And then some of them are very honest about it, and some people feel like they can't even be honest about it because they have to put on this show of strength. And it's really sad. It's just really sad when I'm with a female friend, and I want to take a picture together, and they're like, oh no, I don't know, because I don't look good in this, and my legs are too fat. It makes me feel so sad that like they don't want to commemorate this beautiful, enjoyable moment, because they're so fixated on the male gaze, and they're so fixated on seeing themselves through this outside lens of desirability, instead of recognizing, hey, we're on the beach, like the sun is warm, I had this beautiful day. And it happens to me too. It's like I also have those moments of insecurity where I'm just like, I don't want to be seen on camera, or I don't want to even go outside, because I'm just feeling so I don't know, like people will judge me, either sexualizing me and like being inappropriate because of being sexualized, or kind of writing me off because I'm not beautiful enough in that way, or not desirable enough in that way. And it's just a mind fuck, because even if you're feeling really confident, you still feel like that sexualizing lens might cause you some kind of distress. And it's always in the back of your mind. How do I look? Do I look too sexual? Do I not look sexual enough? Do I look, whatever? And it just takes you out of your present experience. It takes you out of the moment. It takes you out of like yourself. So yeah, those are just some initial thoughts on that.
Oh man, I loved all that, and my brain is like sparking off so hard right now. Okay, there's a few things I wanted to talk about with the stuff that you mentioned, and I'm actually really glad you mentioned the Queen's Gambit, because I also watched that, like pretty much binge watched it, and enjoyed it from on a very superficial level, like aesthetic level. I was like, oh yeah, like sexy, stylish, but something yeah, and I was also really like, those scenes where she's having a breakdown and she's just like, oh, this sexy mad woman, which is I'm so fucking bored of. Like, I'm sorry, but like mental breakdowns are like super fucking embarrassing, and like yeah, anyway, that's like a whole other topic, and one that needs to be unpacked. But something that also really struck me about that show was like, I was really interested in her relationship with her friend from the orphanage, and the relationship with her like adoptive mother. Those were and I know like her character was a loner, so there was a specific choice to divorce her from community, specifically like femme community as well, because she's obviously in the chess world in a male dominated environment. But yeah, it's like I want to see more narratives where like femmes are together and we're like exploring the complexities of their relationships and their communities and um all the stuff going on there. So yeah, I was really struck by how like there was just very little attention given to these relationships. And to go on another like movie tangent, because I think it's as this phrase came from film, and as I think we are currently dealing with the fallout of all the fucked up ways in which the femme body has been presented in film. The landscape of whatever we call like media is obviously changing now, because we have content creators, we have influencers, we have individuals who have huge audiences who in a lot of ways have a lot more agency over how they present themselves, in that, you know, it's not like Britney Spears wouldn't have been like allowed to just dye her hair a different color if she wanted to. She probably, well, I don't know for sure, but it's probably written somewhere in contracts that you have to look a certain way. We grew up with this. We grew up with these films and this way of constructing the female body. So now, when there is more agency, it's like the soil is not nourishing. The soil in which we have to like dig up the soil and change the soil from which we have grown. And that's why we end up and me too, like as I've shared, like I was also diagnosed with an eating disorder at a very early age, and the way that the media interacted and portrayals of the female body like definitely affected my relationship with food and my body, etc. Um, so yeah, we're dealing with this really weird limbo where like, especially like living, well, at least living for me, living where I do in London, it's like there's this illusion or concept of freedom in how I move and how I present myself, and yet the the mindset and the structures that hold certain stereotypes in place still exist. So like when I was like researching the male gaze, there's a really interesting video, and I'll put the link in the description below, of a woman, a film critic, talking about the Transformers films in particular in relation to the male gaze. And it was a really interesting video. And I just wanted to pick up on specifically the Transformer film, specifically the first one with like Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox, because it is aged terribly. It is aged so badly. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure.
I've never actually seen any of those films, but I've seen like clips, so I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
It would be an astonishing waste of your time. So the clips, the clips are 100% enough to get the gist. But yeah, I remember I went to see that film on a date with a boy.
Wow, what a choice.
I definitely didn't choose that, because I was like I mean, I was in another
I
like,
zoomed.
yeah, I was in
I was just
another.
like, what a strange choice for him to make to take you on that date, but that's a whole different thing.
I mean, I was in another like rabbit hole of weird presentation of the female body in like all the indie films I was into. Like they are just as problematic as the mainstream for sure. But yeah, I remember like it's a terrible film, but and like Megan Fox is also just so young. Like the actual Megan Fox is so young when she made that film. Um, I mean, they're both super young. But I remember after the film, the guy just like I won't say his name. The, the guy just spending ages like explaining to me like why he didn't actually think Megan Fox was attractive. And I don't know whether he was doing this for my benefit to like make me feel better about myself because I'm not a Megan Fox. But I just remember like just after just I it was a shitty day and I was like, this fucking film was so bad. And then now you're like talking for half an hour why you don't find another woman who neither of us know or will ever know why you don't find her attractive. And it was bizarre, but it was also I feel like a time capsule of that moment in time. I do feel like a lot of guys have this weird thing about like hating Megan Fox, and it's that whole like misogyny thing of like hating a woman that you know will never desire you. Um,
Mm.
and we talked a bit about this, I think, in our last conversation when we talked about porn, and I think that's fascinating. So yeah, that's the whole other movie tangent. But something I just wanted to pick up upon and refer back to you to bring it back to movement is when you were talking before, you were saying ways about the way in which a woman is like presented, and it got me thinking a lot about uh, how our desire and how our pleasure is often presented. And for me, movement and movement practices are about pleasure. They're about, uh, yeah, just really, really sensual, good feelings. Um, and I wanted to like just ask you about how movement has like increased your capacity for pleasure, I guess, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Oh my God, so much, right? Like movement practices have just changed, like because basically my relationship with my body took such a toll, like took such a hit during my childhood and adolescence from all these things, from media representation and just like people around me also internalizing that, and then also like sending me messages that, you know, my body was to this or to that or whatever, you know. So like my relationship with my body, like I wasn't really in my body. I think I was just like really, really in my mind. And I felt really comfortable being in my mind because I don't know, because you can kind of like, if you, I don't know, if you have a sort of mind where you are able to like use words and use language and debate with people, you can kind of just like keep defending yourself and be like kind of defend some sort of intellectual superiority, or, you know, be really knowledgeable about a subject and kind of like sort of give yourself some level of self-esteem based on your intellectual, whatever, your achievements or your inflated intellectual sense of self or whatever it is, right? But you can stay in this very like abstract mental world where you're actually not very connected to your body. And I think a lot of people are actually constantly in that very mental world and they're just not connecting with their body. And I was there for like a really long time, and it's kind of crazy to me how many years that I spent just so numb. Like, I understand why it was like the result of a lot of different things, trauma, and just not feeling safe in my body. So there were good reasons at the time, but like it's just so sad to me now that because because my body was such a source of like conflict within myself, of like I didn't feel good about my body, but I also it affected my like ability to feel good through my senses just generally, like when I was eating, or when I was like, when if someone was touching me, like if someone was massaging me or something, I would feel very like weird about it. I couldn't just receive and enjoy pleasure in a healthy way, because of this constant anxiety about how does my body look, what do people think of my body, am I doing something wrong, is my body going to do something wrong or embarrassing, or whatever. um, and when I started doing different movement practices, or even when I was just a kid and I was just dancing, I always loved dancing. I would just wait until my parents and everyone else had gone to sleep so I could like dance in the living room, just put on music, and like that was me connecting with my movement practice, I suppose. But I wasn't doing it consistently, and I wasn't really conscious of what I was doing. But yeah, like when I was going through these really dark times about my feelings about my body and myself, I just became very disconnected and very numb, so to the point where it was like at times, like my body was giving me signals about situations that I could not pick up on, whether it was like signals that a situation was dangerous, or signals that I didn't feel comfortable with this person, or signals that would have helped me to make life decisions that actually made me feel good in the long run, instead of rationalizations of what I should do based on what other people had said. All these things, all this information that my body was able to give me, I was just ignoring and disregarding, because I just thought of my body as a source of kind of pain and embarrassment and limitation, as opposed to this incredible thing that allows me to interact with the world and experience all kinds of different amazing things, including pleasure and bliss. So when I started practicing, well, before, dancing would always bring me that joy, but like I said, it wasn't very conscious. It wasn't very like, I just would do it naturally, which is also great. But when I actually got to doing yoga, and I found out about also yoga philosophy, this was like a really big life-changing thing to me, because obviously in yoga there's this notion of like this bliss state that you can kind of achieve and that you fall in and out of as you practice. And this kind of bliss state is interesting because you it's beyond the body in a certain way, but within the practices of yoga, there are lots of tools and techniques that you can use the body to get closer to this bliss state. And so it doesn't do this thing that a lot of religious doctrines do, where they kind of just like curse the body and say like the body is just only the material and it's not important and only the spiritual matters. And I think that that's kind of ridiculous, because whatever belief system you're in, like just why would you have a body if it was useless and stupid and what, like it just like instead of viewing it in this way that just creates conflict, you can view it in a way where you recognize the beauty and the potential and the limitations. We don't have to pretend like we do in a capitalist kind of consumer society that like the body doesn't die and the body's just you have to just try and keep your youth forever, and like everything, it's all about the young, beautiful, perfectly proportioned body that like never ages. Like, no, you can have an attitude towards the body where you recognize the normal processes that it goes through, and actually try to love those and try to like find the beauty in each one of those processes as it goes on, instead of trying to fight against everything all the time. So yeah, like my yoga practice sort of was the first place, because I I think like all the teachers that I went to, I was lucky enough to have teachers that were very emphatic about the internal experience rather than the external experience. I mean, at times I've had teachers who are more focused on like the external, the straightness of the line or whatever. But luckily, like early on, I had teachers who were just very much about the internal, about like feeling, just the basics of learning how to feel into your body. And I think a lot of people, that's just never occurred to them to just like sit and feel into their body, or it has, but then it's caused so much anxiety because it hasn't been done in like a guided way where they're not just sitting there feeling bad about all the things that they think are wrong with their body, but actually like learning how to really just feel it without judgment. Yeah, so like learning that, I also had like very early experiences with lucid dreaming when I was a teenager, pre-teenager, and that like changed my whole perception of so many things as well. Because like when I was doing that practice, um it's really difficult to describe because you're having an experience in your dream, which is like a high quality virtual reality type experience where you can do all these things. But you are still physically connected to your physical body as you're sleeping. And you can also, I mean, like there are various methods that you can use when you're doing either like dream yoga or just lucid dreaming, that you can still be conscious of your body when you're lucid in your dream. Like you can use breath techniques to wake yourself up, or you can like sometimes you can feel your body that's just in bed while you're still having this crazy experience. And or you can, you know, notice how, you know, for example, taking certain substances like 5-HTP or something changes, or even drinking green tea at certain periods of the night or whatever can change your whole consciousness. And you start to have this recognition of like the intrinsic deep connection between your physiology and your consciousness. And it's really wild when you start exploring it and experiencing it, because your whole you know, your whole interaction with the world changes, your whole interaction with pleasure changes, like you said. Like yeah, so once I stopped having this like block between me and like thinking about how I was perceived all the time, and just like instead focusing in on my experience, like wow, I started to just it just started to be so much more interesting. My life started to feel so much more whole, and not like I was constantly trying to be something other than what I am, but just feeling really comfortable to experience what I am. And yeah, I don't know. I could just go on for ages, so just pause. Yeah.
Oh man, that was beautiful. And I actually just want to linger for a moment on that image of you as a kid dancing in your front room when everyone has gone to bed, because that is it. Like, that is where it's at. Like, that is the movement practice. Like, I feel like it's so interesting because with the work that I do and the way I exist in the world, I have this curious tension because as a performer, I get pleasure out of making my body look a certain way for other people. And I don't
Mhm.
think there's anything wrong with that. And um, I want to be really like clear when I talk about like movement practice um and that kind of stuff, because I've gotten into like um disagreements with specifically other yoga practitioners um around this thing you were saying about like being obsessed with being outside of the body, and being like the mind, the higher chakras, like the not even the mind, but like the out of body is the awakened state. It's
Mm.
always difficult talking about this stuff because we're using words, and like words are just problematic in nature. But like, I felt like I went through this like rejection of performance for a while because I was like, no, I need to like not ever be constructing myself for someone else. It needs to be completely internal. And like I went through this. I also had a really difficult relationship with dance growing up because it was kind of like enmeshed with my eating disorder in many ways. But once I was able to like untangle those two things, and realize that like there's nothing actually wrong with performing as long as you have your own like boundaries around like when I think it's always important to have a movement practice that is just for you. And that for me is the kid dancing in the living room at night. Like because I'm so often on display, even when I'm teaching in a lot of situations, I'm like, just even from alignment perspective, I'm like, okay, I want to show people how to do these things safely. Especially when I'm doing circus stuff, teaching aerial stuff, safety is key. So I've got to make sure like I'm completely aligned so people can look at me, or as aligned as I can be, so people can look at me and go, okay, that's how I need to like form this structure. But then I need to make sure that I have a regular movement practice that is just like messy and playful. I'm wearing really comfortable clothes. Maybe I'm even naked if I have that opportunity to be alone, and I'm just like going from that feeling perspective. And there's a word, somatics, that is used quite often now, and I've started to use it as well. And as far as I understand it, like somatics is like a movement practice that prioritizes feeling over aesthetics, and you're coming at the external from the internal.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important, if as we all spend so much time like formulating ourselves and holding ourselves in certain ways for others, it's really important to then have those moments where we can just move and breathe and make noises and just like be a kid, essentially, is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had there was somewhere else I was going with that, but oh yeah. Yeah, one more thing I'll say on that with relation to like tensions and difficulties. Um, I feel particularly as a small femme presenting person living in London, I end up moving my body in certain ways throughout the day to have a sense of safety, I guess, a lot of the time. That would be like from an external, it's like the clothes that I wear to keep my certain things like held and covered and um sitting on the train, and I like keeping your legs really squeezed together even if you're not noticing it. Like on an internal perspective, I'm probably like holding my stomach muscles tight because I it's very sensorially overwhelming being in a big city, and I'm probably anxious because of that. I'm realizing lately that I think I have a really overactive pelvic floor because I think I'm like squeezing my pelvic floor just all the time, even when I'm not aware of it. So like, if you there's a really interesting term that a woman who runs a podcast called The Womb Room, her name's Kiddist, she uses this term called holding patterns. And it really resonated with me because I was like, oh yeah, I have so many holding patterns throughout my day that give me maybe even a false sense, but they give me some kind of sense of like boundaries and security that for me, like the movement practice can help break some of those, and or not break them, but like massage them, literally massage them out of me and get them out of me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really amazing point that you just raised. So many people will mentally like, move on from a certain situation. Maybe they'll like do the work and realize, okay, I had XYZ feelings about the situation and I want to move on. And yet they won't feel like they've moved on because they haven't recognized these ways in which the body is still holding on to what happened or still reacting to what happened. And yeah, like because of people being quite disconnected from just experiencing the body, like even people who are very active with their body can sometimes be very in the dark about these kind of things because they're not in the habit of just doing like a more meditative practice of just scanning the body and understanding what's going on. So another common one you mentioned about the pelvic floor, which I think is very, very common with a lot of women who, whether or not we've experienced trauma, but just I think just being in a patriarchal society and being constantly objectified and all these kind of concerns that this is just naturally traumatic. So a lot of women will have this kind of tension just in that space. But for people of all genders, there's also, just the clenching the stomach. A lot of people, and, a lot of people will experience some sort of health related issue maybe after years of this happening. And unfortunately, our medical system doesn't tend to like have a very good consolidated understanding of how these kind of muscular patterns can actually impact health, or maybe there's an understanding in the medical system, but it doesn't like get down to the GPs and the people who are like generally diagnosing patients or whatever, or they just don't have the resources or close interaction with their patients to notice these things, whatever it is. But so often things with our musculature and our posture and our holding patterns, whether it's like tension in the stomach or constantly slumping over and creating tensions in parts of the body where it's not natural, or whatever it is. Everyone's different and everyone's conditioning has been a little bit different, what they're ashamed of and how they're dealing with it. But these things also affect other parts of the physiology. Obviously, if you're putting a ton more tension and pressure on, parts of the body, especially when it's in this area where all these major organs are, right? Like it affects the functioning of the organs, and it's not. I don't think it's particularly controversial to say this, but it's oftentimes not picked up on, and so you get people having conditions that come out of nowhere, or pain that comes out of nowhere, but it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from decades of a certain kind of strain and build up in your system, which is why it's so important to have that connection with the body where you can have the space to like make a friendship, make an alliance with your body, make a make a relationship that's like you're learning from the body, not hating upon it. You're appreciating it and letting it be safe to give you this information, and also to know that like it can let go, that it can relax. All these things, I think you have to really actively put your intention towards making an alliance with your body. Yeah, and also like, oh, there was something else that you said about performance before that I just wanted to pick up on. I'm not a performer, but it was interesting to hear you. Like, I mean, I perform sometimes, but I feel like I'm not really a performer, and I don't think of myself in that way. And like, I think of my practice mostly like a somatic practice more than like how it looks to people. But when I first started doing yoga, there was also that kind of notion of like, how does this look to people? And sometimes that still comes up. But I think from doing a lot of Ashtanga, particularly where you're kind of so focused in on your practice, and there's so many like people of all different like levels of practice around you, you become quite, once you've been in a Mysore room for, you know, several times for a long time, you become quite like detached from that external focus. Like you just, if you want to be doing your practice in the Mysore room, you kind of don't have the capacity to also like be focusing on everyone else's practice. You just kind of have to focus in on your own practice. And that was something that built my somatic awareness up a lot, compared to just normal, like everyone doing the same thing yoga classes. But yeah, from the point of view of someone who consumes art or likes to like watch performances, especially dance, I can totally see that the tension there between like wanting to, you know, produce something in a certain way and having like an aesthetic ideal of what you want to convey, and also how do you balance that with the performer's somatic experience and not, I guess not like reproduce that can be like abusive or not very nice feeling. Like I just think of like you know, my idea of like the all the female ballerinas and that like male dance producer or whatever who's like critiquing their like in Black Swan or something, you know, where it's like this like the male gaze of like this is how you need to like blah 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 blah. And even when it's coming from a woman, because a woman can internalize that kind of misogyny and reproduce it, like how to break out of that, you have to be very sensitive. And I think an important part of that maybe is what you mentioned about like emphasizing to people to have their own movement practice and also be, you know, confident and like create a space where people can be confident to communicate their boundaries and how they're feeling on a certain day and not like push too hard, because I think that that's really glorified in a lot of the performance dance spaces, to just like art is suffering and your body has to suffer and, you know, all this kind of stuff, which I mean, I guess it could produce good art, but like so can a lot of things produce good art that don't have like suffering as part of them, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a very interesting tension, and it's definitely one that I'm just in conversation with it a lot. But I feel like it's something that, yeah, all these things, it's a conversation and it's something to be like aware of and challenging yourself with. And I think something that we've spoken about before is, I think we spoke about it a bit in our like yoga and activism chat about like not running from pain, and like pain, like these practices and like a movement practice can sometimes be uncomfortable. But I think discomfort and working through the kind of icky, difficult feelings, it is an important process. And that sometimes to move doesn't feel so good at first, especially if, as we say, if we have holding patterns, if we have things that we are dealing with. I think something we keep returning to in this chat is the body registers and knows so much. And unfortunately, because we live in a culture that is very divorced from the body, you know, we essentially outsource our knowledge to health practitioners, to personal trainers, to gurus. And that I get that. I do that. I still do that. Even to like, you know, alternative healthcare practitioners we are often like looking for someone to guide us because we have so little knowledge or understanding or practice culturally of dropping into the body, like
Mhm.
feel like how often, I mean, like me and you may be different because we've been like actively making this a part of our lives for a long time, but how often do people sit and even drop into like the tips of their toes? Like, what are the very ends of the soles of my feet feeling? And what can that
Mhm.
tell me about my emotional state? And for me, my body speaks very loud. My body speaks very loud. I've talked about like jaw dislocations. I'll have just crazy stuff going on with my body, and I that has to do with being so connected to it. So like the connection isn't always pretty as well. It's not
Mhm.
always like, whoa, beautiful, dripping with honey, sensuals. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, it's just like, oh, it's so
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really important to mention as well.
I mean, yeah, like there's a beautiful aspect of like connecting with someone who's put in the time and effort to learn a lot about whether it's like whatever aspect of the body and healing the body that they have specialized in. But it's almost useless in a way if you don't have the internal information to communicate to that person. Because in some cases, you can run some tests and they can see some information. But like, if you're not aware, for example, that you're, clenching your jaw constantly 24/7 or that your stomach is constantly wound up, it's going to take a lot longer for them to figure out why you're having tension headaches or why your indigestion issues are acting up in this way. And they might run a bunch of tests on other things, or they might give you a bunch of information that's not really relevant. And if you had just had the awareness to be able to communicate some of these things, first you might have actually solved your own problem. You might have recognized, oh, I have this pattern, and when this happens, and shit, maybe I can stop this. How do I work on relaxing XYZ? You might not have had to spend the $300 that you spend on the professional that you consulted. But in certain cases, you will still have to consult someone, and they'll be able to help you so much better if you just have the awareness of your body to let them know what's going on with you on a broader level. Like, then they'll have so much more to work with. So yeah, I think it's just a great thing for yourself to connect with all parts of your, like you were mentioning about like feeling like, what do I feel in the sole of my foot or in my big toe or my little toe, whatever. And for us, that's like a very, regular practice for a long time because of our yoga practice. And for me also with the lucid dreaming practice, you do body scans constantly as you're like, going into sleep paralysis. So you like intensively do that. And it's just such a simple thing that pretty much anyone can do. It doesn't require you to be like strong or flexible or whatever, but it's such an important practice. I feel like these are the kind of practices that people overlook. Everyone's trying to like do handstands, but it's like, forget the handstands, do the body scan. Like it's going to benefit you like a million times more. Like handstands are fun. I love handstands, but like seriously, with no body scan, I don't even think I could do a handstand. Like, I wasn't like a gymnastics person when I was younger or whatever. And if I, a big part of when you're doing more challenging poses or whatever in yoga, like more physically challenging asanas, so much of like there's a part of it that's about like building strength or whatever, but so much of it is just about body awareness. Like so much of like the things that I couldn't do before, it's not really that I suddenly built a huge amount of muscle or whatever, or became so much more flexible. It's literally like I just lacked body awareness a lot of the time and some aspects of practice. And, there's some things that your body needs to adjust and open, but like some things are literally just, I couldn't do it for ages because I just didn't have the body awareness. And it's wild because sometimes, you think that just like doing more is going to produce so many more results. And actually, we often, because of our culture and the society we're in, we just don't recognize the 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 importance of just being receptive, like how just being receptive and not like constantly trying to get to a certain place and do a certain thing and pushing and resisting, how just being receptive and like allowing things to come up and speak to you and allowing yourself to build awareness can actually benefit you. It's so wild.
I'm also on that point about the body scan and the handstand, because I think is a really, really interesting one. It's also like, imagine how much you will enjoy a handstand or anything like a handstand if you have the practice of the body scan. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
you have that practice of dropping in and just being like, how is everything feeling? When you put your body in these like really interesting positions and you can stay with them and then drop in, it's like, whoa, like it's really it's transcendent and it's ecstatic. Like, I honestly like, and it's the reason I keep, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's me, because I do the same near enough the same things, like in terms of movement practice every day, because it's really about enjoyment, and it's really about pleasure, and it's really about like, yeah, like just being right there in the middle of it all.
That
Um,
quote is so
yeah.
funny. Like I've often that quote is just so it's such a meme. Like it's everywhere
Yeah,
on the internet. And I always have like a lot of thoughts whenever I see that quote because it, on one level is true, like what you practice grows, but on another level it's so like obviously not true. Like every day we get
yeah,
up and we do similar things, but every day is completely different,
yeah,
or maybe some people don't recognize that, but if you really thought that every day was the same, you'd feel like you were going crazy and you were in some like alternate universe. Every day is slightly different. you know
yeah.
like I don't know, it's such a weird quote.
And like going back, relating it once again to handstands, because like obviously
Yeah.
obsessed, like for good reason, because they're fun, like they make you feel like a kid. But like, I do the same handstand drills every day, but they never feel the same because
Yeah,
like,
because you're a different person every day. You've
exactly,
changed. You had yesterday's
exactly.
experiences. Yeah, so I just, I feel so sad when I meet like, and it's a lot of people, right? Like now yoga is becoming more mainstream, but like still the somatic element is kind of sometimes missing from a lot of what is being taught. It's very performative. um but like, yeah, so it's becoming more widespread. People are starting to read more about these things. There have been some popular books, you know so there's some awareness that's growing about these matters now. But still I just meet so many people who I feel sad because like uh they'll see me doing something, whatever it is, whether it's flowing, doing like some hooping or whatever, and I'll invite them to just play. I'll be like, hey, do you want to just like come and try this thing? And the fear that I can feel it from them
Mm,
immediately, like, oh no, I can't, I'm not strong enough, I'm not flexible, I'm not this, I'm not that. And I'm like, I'm just saying, let's play. Like, you don't have to
yeah.
be anything, right? You can just enjoy this experience, right? Like, I'm like that because as well from doing a lot of flow practice, when you do hoop and poi and everything. Like now if I have a freaking hanger or something, I'll just like start twirling the hanger and playing with the hanger like it's some kind of like, I don't know, like a nunchuck or something. And it's just like everything becomes a toy and everything becomes kind of like just something that can entertain you, right? So why not have that kind of mentality, but like so many people are just like, I'll look stupid. And I just like
Mm,
that externalization just is the death of like fun and creativity and innovation for me. Just constant rumination about other people's perception, cutting you off from being who you are and the fullness of your own expression and enjoyment. It's just every person has to decide for themselves, what do they want to do? Do they really do they really want to do that and be so concerned about external perception to that point, or do you want to just have fun and just enjoy your body? Right?
Yeah.
And not like in a destructive way, you know, like so many people make it out like enjoying your body has to be this like destructive, gluttonous thing, and it just doesn't, you know. In fact, if you really enjoy and respect your body, you want to take care of it, you don't want to abuse it with excess. So destroying this dichotomy around the body, that like either the body is everything or the body is like nothing, is very important, I would say, right now for just everyone. I was thinking earlier on, this is going to just change the topic very slightly and we can just come back from this, but like just I was reflecting on politically, you know, it's expensive and a lot of effort to go and police people all the time, constantly with force on the ground, and how useful it is for the people trying to control us, whether it's like big corporations or governments or whatever, people who benefit in some way from controlling us. It's so useful for them to have us disconnected from our bodies. It's so useful for them to have us not thinking that we're really that much and that we're all in competition with each other, and I have to be skinnier than her, or I have to have like a bigger ass than her, or I have to like be stronger and more macho than him, or whatever the fuck, right? Like these things, you know, occupy our time and effort in such ways, and make us so insecure and not sure about what we deserve in society, that they prevent us from going after what we deserve and asserting it, and like knowing that we're worthy of that, knowing that we're worthy of better, because we don't know, we're disconnected from ourselves, we don't feel ourselves, you know. It's kind of terribly evilly brilliant, that's not brilliant evil,
Yeah.
you know, kind of to make people, you know, constantly consume or constantly, you know, pursue these ideals, because then people can't look around and be like, hey, what the heck is going on? Society is really fucked, we need to do something. But like, I don't know, it's just very convenient for the
Yeah.
powers that be, I would say. And
Yeah.
religion uses this constantly. Religion uses this in a major way to oppress people and to control them. So it's a
Yeah.
very powerful weapon.
100%, because when you start to feel into yourself and your true needs, and what it takes to fulfill them, you start to get angry. You start to get angry about why is there not, why is the air in my city so polluted? So I don't want to go for a run because I live right next to the motorway. Or why is the quality of my food so shitty and I don't have enough money to um, buy organically or seasonally or whatever? Like, you start to get angry. Why do I not have a space where I can cartwheel, which I think everyone deserves a big enough space to do a cartwheel um, without shame or, you know. And yeah, 100%. Last, the last little point I just wanted to bring in um, is just about how the male gaze or the patriarchal gaze or these structures are also hugely limiting for the masculine presenting body and the male body, obviously. Of course, we can only really talk from a femme perspective,
Yeah.
but as someone who works in commercial gyms and teaches in commercial gyms and sees a lot of masculine bodies every single day, there's a pattern. There is a definite pattern of their holding patterns that they have to uphold or feel as though they have to uphold as well. And that's in no way, like, I will say that the female body has suffered more the femme body has suffered more under the patriarchy, and like I will not be argued on that. But yeah, I think there's these limiting structures also interfere with the ways in which masculine presenting beings can move, and I think it's very related to pleasure, because so much of the way male or masculine movement is conditioned into young boys and young men, it's very functional. It's very like, you do this so you can do this, and it's not very circular, it's not very sensual. There is a lack of like spiraling and a lack of like opening, I would say. And we still live with this infuriating stereotype that male bodies that present feminine characteristics are weak or display weaknesses. Whereas the male dancers I have known in my life are some of the physically strongest beings I've ever encountered. So yeah, I think that's very important to say. And I just wanted to you to talk a little bit more about this is also maybe a bit of a tangent, but yeah, like your experiences in the like pole spaces, and yeah, those things together are the last things that I wanted to talk about, really.
Yeah. Okay. So first on the male bodies, I definitely think that like holding patterns or armoring affects just people generally, regardless of sex or gender. And the performance of masculinity is as real as the kind of performance of femininity and everything that's like involved in that, in the, you know, in the social construct. Yeah, I think it's a really good point about like the lack of like focus on flexibility or like softness in the body. It's really weird to me because personally, when I think of like empowered masculinity or like external force that can make things happen, I don't think of like overly stiff, hugely muscled men who can barely like lift their arms out straight above their head because of the limitations of how they've managed to develop certain muscles to the detriment of their actual movement. This for me is like one of the most worrying and weird aspects of like male fitness, where I'm just like, are you really spending so many hours per day in a gym to like make your muscles strong, and you're losing like the capability to actually move fluidly in the world? Like, you know, what happens if you get into a fight and you need to dodge someone, but you can't do it because your back is too stiff? Like, you know, that's what I think all of the time when I see these guys like obsessively lifting in the gym in a way that's obviously geared towards an external perception of physique that they want to achieve, rather than gearing their practices in a way that serve a, you know, a practical function in the world beyond just doing that motion well. You know, I think, you know, as more general like movement practitioners and people who work in yoga, obviously yoga has this like therapeutic side to it, where a lot of the time you're helping people with injuries and stuff. So it's not uncommon for us as yoga teachers to see people who are very like constrained, not just because of lifestyle, but because of things they've like, you know, lifestyle is in like, oh, sitting at the computer, but things that they've chosen to do for their health, or for their health, but like for the external validation that they look healthy to other people, and just end up like actually doing damage to their body. It's you know, we all make mistakes with our body and do damage at times, so it's not like something to beat yourself up over at all. Everyone has the struggles, but like it is sad when there's no self-awareness of this, where, you know, people are just repeatedly, they're not getting that, like, hey, you need to feel into your body, that not everything is about pushing and fighting and like resistance, and this sort of notion that masculinity has to be defined in these ways is just so like limiting to everyone, you know, to everyone. Yeah, and I agree, like spiraling, just softer motions that are like trying to, you know, like how do I say it, like not everything at the extreme, you know, but exploring all the middle stuff that happens with softness and slowness as well. Like, I don't know, I can't really talk from a male perspective on this issue. I just can observe from the outside as a woman that it's not attractive to me when a guy is so, or it doesn't matter if it's attractive to me. I feel sad when people are constrained by their bodies instead of empowered by their bodies. And instead of like exploring what their bodies can do, they're kind of masochistically putting themselves through something that they don't really enjoy or sort of enjoy, but like it's just like a fight with themselves. And it's like, you don't have to have your existence be a fight with your body. You can actually like really have a much more pleasant experience and still be really strong. Like, I'm so much more impressed when I can see someone doing, like, you know, climbing something and just like holding on with their hands and just climbing something, than I am when I just see like someone do one very repetitive same movement that they can never like really replicate into the real world, because they've only freaking learned moving in this one plane. And so as soon as you know, have to do something using this muscle instead of this, whatever it is, right, like they can't do it. Like, I think, yeah, like I'm always really motivated towards movement that has like multiple possibilities, that gives birth to multiple possibilities, and that, you know, is adaptable. So move this towards more light.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I just I won't go on a tangent here because it's not the place for it, but what you were just saying reminds me of my kind of like, I have this beef with CrossFit, and it just like all my students know it makes me so mad, and like I probably need to like get over it, because if you want to do CrossFit and you're living your best life, like do CrossFit. But yeah, just that like as many things as possible, as hard as you can now. It's just like,
you know, like for me, I get the point in, you know, I kind of, you know, I'm really pitta dominant. I have a lot of fire energy, and I kind of love the challenge of doing things. You know, when we were in university and I used to go running, I think you kind of like said that you hated running, but for me, I loved running because it was just like, I don't know, it just like the challenge and pushing myself and like whatever, it made me feel really good. And I still love running. I just don't do it as much because I know it's not as good for my joints, and I like, my body takes so much more damage from running than like from hiking and walking. So I just prefer, but like psychologically I love it, you know, because I have so much fire energy that kind of needs to get out and be channeled somewhere. So I totally understand the attraction that people have towards that, and I think it can be totally good for people, as long as they are really solid in their knowledge of their limits, and like their knowledge of when, you know, the good pain is crossing over into bad pain, or like when they're in that mental space on that day where they're just pushing themselves in a self-punishing way, and then they're like, oh no, this is not coming from, this motivation isn't coming from the right place. Sometimes, you know, people are very like emphatic about, you know, you have to practice, you have to go in, put in the work every day. But sometimes the work is realizing this is not the correct thing for me to do today, and I need to do something that's more gentle, and that this is actually more damaging in the long run. And I think unfortunately a lot of people are not very, they don't have a grounded foundation in that before they come to these other practices, and then they end up just like, you know, enjoying it, but then doing long-term damage that stops them from doing the very thing they enjoy, just because they didn't have that grounding, and they didn't have that, like, you know, whatever. Like, mistakes happen, accidents happen, we can all injure ourselves, that's fine. But I'm talking about situations where there's just a constant pattern of pushing yourself too hard. And I think, yeah, like, that's where I'm so glad that I learned yoga when I was so young, before I came to a lot of these other practices, because it gave me that, like, sense of like, when is this healthy pain or just like discomfort, and when is this like actual like pain, like I need to stop, or tiredness, like I need to stop, or just even emotions. There's sometimes times where you just like, you just need to stop and just like sit, because pushing yourself to go through doing a bunch of handstands when you're grieving or something like that is not helping you in that moment. Some days it will help you, but like getting that differentiation, which comes from the somatic awareness, is so vital, and just improves your experience of your own life so much, like so much.
Yeah, that really tied everything up really nicely. Yeah, and I just wanted to round off by talking very briefly about your experience in pole, and like the pole um the pole communities. And so I'm not a pole teacher or a pole dancer, but I do teach at a pole studio. And I when I go and I teach aerial yoga class after a pole class. And whenever I go into that studio, they've just had a pole class, and there's just like this energy in the room, which is like so like electric and high, and like people are like barely wearing any clothes. It's the
My
studio
God, I love pole studios. I
yeah,
miss
like
pole
the
studios
studio I
now.
teach at, it's I don't think it's only women, like specifically, but it is only women that attend the classes. And yeah, and there's just like this joyfulness, and this like uninhibitedness, and also like a real like uplifting of each other, which is so nice. So yeah, I just wanted to end on that lovely image and note, and yeah, what it's brought into your life, basically.
Oh my God, yeah, pole. I mean, every practice that has like come into my umbrella of different movement practices obviously brings something special and different. Um, as I'm sure like you can relate to with all the different practices you do as well. Um, but yeah, like, what can I say? Yeah, like, pole studios do have an amazing, awesome electric vibe. Not that I've been in so many different studios. I mostly just like practiced in the studio in Chiang Mai, and
Mm.
I went to a few, but like, you know, very infrequently because of the pandemic and everything. And usually it was like private and very different from the normal vibe that you would be in. But yeah, like, pole studios, it's a cool setting, because firstly, yeah, you kind of, everyone's sort of wearing very few clothes, sort of like similar in Ashtanga because of
Mm.
practical considerations, right? Like in Ashtanga, wearing clothes is just, it's kind of a hindrance, because you're doing all these like movements and your clothes get caught on your feet and shit like that if you're wearing like like, honestly, like, I prefer to practice wearing just like very short shorts, and if I'm alone, I won't even wear a shirt sometimes, or a bra, but I would wear like a sports bra or something. And it's just the easiest thing to do, like, you know, when you're doing jump throughs, jump backs, and all this stuff, and it's just like, you don't want clothes in the way, you're sweating profusely, so it's, you don't want to like sweat into tons of clothes, and it just makes sense. And the same thing, when you're on the pole, like for practical considerations of sticking to the pole, it's just easier to have skin on pole contact. um, and so yeah, like, everyone's sort of, I don't want to say that everyone's comfortable in their body, because obviously that's not true. Like, a lot of people when they first come to pole feel very not confident with their body. But I think that that's like the nice thing about pole spaces is they're generally very inclusive like that. It's not really about like what shape or size your body is, or if you're, male, female, non-binary, like woman, man, trans. It like doesn't really matter. It's quite an inclusive sort of space from the studios that I've been to anyway. And yeah, like I don't know, it's always just so much fun to be in a pole studio. There's kind of like, you don't have to be like into doing like really sexy dancing. Like you could just be like into doing like contemporary style dance, but like with a pole with that element. Or you can be like very like gymnastic about it or whatever, right? Like there's so many different styles, but because it does like have this association with stripping and nightclubs and stuff, there is like the teachers often at pole studios, they'll offer like some kind of choreo or some kind of like sexy thing, which is also nice for people to come and kind of get in touch with that in like in a way that's just fun and enjoyable, and just like just enjoying your own body. And like I don't know, that aspect that's like actively consciously realized in a pole studio kind of makes it like quite relaxed in a way, just naturally, because people aren't like trying to be the best, most cutting edge artist, right? Like they're just like, let me twerk a little bit in the mirror. Oh shit, I fell down the pole and fucking landed on my ass. Like it just becomes really like funny and silly. Like you're all like hyping each other up constantly. And it's yeah, the pole studios I've been in, it's just been a very supportive, fun environment. And yeah, it's not really gender specific. Like I mean, the main two studios that I've been at, like one's run by women, but then the one that I've been going to over here is run by a man. And I think for men who can get over the associations with like what pole is, like, oh, it's for strippers, it's for women, they pretty quickly learn that it's pretty hard. Lifting all your body weight on the pole and like doing flips and shit is it's no easy thing, and it's actually quite physically challenging and really fun if you're into it. So yeah, it's like it's cool because like even straight men can come and they're just like, hey, like this is physically challenging and it's fun to try and like climb this thing and go upside down. And yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know what else
and
about it.
like yeah, just to speak on that as well, the teacher who teaches the class before mine is a man, and it's really fascinating. Like I don't know where the origins of pole come from, but we see elements of some form of pole dance in many different parts of the world. Like I think it's called Malakam is the I think it originated in India. I'm not 100% sure, but it's it's like thicker and it's a wooden pole. And then there's
Yeah.
Chinese pole as well, which I actually did a performance in about a year and a half ago. So there's like pole. There is like you can see different forms of some kind of pole dance in a lot of ancient traditions and in a lot of different parts of the world. And I just that energy of that studio. It's like it's very ecstatic.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that
I think the spinning as well, like that's one
yes.
thing both with hooping and with pole, the spinning motion. I mean, I don't know physiologically what is the mechanism that makes you feel this way, but it kind of creates some sort of ecstatic state for, maybe not for everyone, but I think for a lot of people, it kind of puts you in this sort of giddy, happy, kind of almost effortlessly happy and high kind of state. And it reminds me of like, the whirling dervishes and Sufism and stuff, kind of tapping into that like centrifugal falling motion, and just staying in the flow of that, that's kind of the fun challenge with pole, especially when I'm doing spinning pole. It's just like you have to kind of like hold yourself on the pole while it spins you around and kind of like work with the pole. And the hardest thing sometimes is not like holding on and doing the stuff, but it's just like kind of allowing yourself to be in this like weird whirling motion that you're not used to, which can feel very like overwhelming at first. But like on the times when you're in the flow and it's like you're just feeling it, it's so nice because you're just you do get this like happiness, this ecstasy, and you're just in that flow state, where it's just like letting go and just being a monkey. It's so like it's so normal in a way, right? Like the idea of humans just climbing up poles because like there are like small skinny trees that are sort of like poles and people need to climb up them to get whatever's up there. Like in Thailand, it's and I think I've seen people in Hawaii also, they just have like a really fast technique to just climb up the tree to get like coconuts or whatever from the coconut trees, and they're just like and come back down. It's like actually quite difficult.
Yeah, I love that, and I love this just this idea of like getting back to something both like childlike and also like instinctive or instinctual. Yeah, and I think that's what it's all about. That's what like I'm basically making my life mission. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I feel that it's just these kind of things of like body image and people's like comfort in their body, they're sort of treated like by our society as kind of mild things that are not that important compared to like the big things of like social movements and political blah blah blah, and this contract was signed, whatever, this technology, this scientific advancement. But I think that they're so important. Like I think that people don't really recognize what kind of a world we could live in if we had more self-sovereignty, if we had more like understanding of ourselves and more empowerment within ourselves and respect for other people's being themselves. Because I think so much like of the judgment between people comes from like judgments we put on ourselves or we have about ourselves, right? And then we kind of projecting them out in various ways. And I insulate myself from a lot of people who have this kind of tendency. But like I was reflecting earlier today on like how many people that I know who just will sit around and like comment on like the bodies of strangers as they go by. It's like a pet peeve of mine. I hate that. I can't be around people who do that. It really annoys me because I'm just like, you don't, and it's usually men about women, but it's not always that way. So sometimes it's also women, but like especially when men just like comment on the bodies of like women who are going past, like, oh, she's getting old, or oh, she should go to the gym, and like I'm just like, what the so unattractive, because it's like so much insecurity and entitlement to other people's bodies that you don't know anything about. And I just like, why? Nobody asked for your opinion, nobody cares about your opinion on someone else's body, they're just doing their thing. But like the impact of people kind of being like that towards one another and having this kind of judgmental attitude like toward other people's bodies, I think a lot of that trauma is not recognized as like the reason why people end up doing shitty things in their life, because they can't even recognize that they feel that much shame around their own body or whatever, and it turns into a whole different story. And I think like it's just so much sadness and so much suffering that occupies so much of our time and energy and people's priorities and people's everything, which all that energy could be so much better used for our world and for themselves in their own lives, for their own enjoyment. And I feel like it's a huge movement if we move from this kind of state that we're in towards people recognizing these things. I think that is going to be just a game changer on so many different levels. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. If we can collectively help each other move through these narratives of shame, these
Mm.
narratives of insecurity, if we can lift each other up out of that, like we can actually use our energy in like a really lovely, supportive, and like vibrant way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like, I feel so sad, like, when I think of the number of people that I know who have just not done so many things because of their insecurities about their body, or they've spent so much energy and time just like invested in, negative thoughts towards themselves and towards other people for just being as they are. And it's just, yeah, it's kind of like all that wasted energy and time. Just like, come on. And even in my own life, I'm just like, why did I waste time like that when I could have been, just like dancing around like this and not caring, you know?
Spinning around the pole as fast as you can.
Around whatever, yeah, just
Yeah.
like what, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to close. This has been such a lovely chat. Yeah, let's do more of these in the future. This is so nice.
Yeah.
I will leave any like things that we've mentioned, not the Transformer movie, but any
Please no.
don't do it to yourself. I'll leave any
Yeah.
constructive good things that we've mentioned in the description box, and also our social medias as well, so you can find out more about what we do. All right, I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay, cool. I'll
Thank you for
stop too.
listening.